Hi everyone and welcome to a new video on the CBI channel. In this tutorial series we're creating a login/authentication system using Python Django in the backend and React.js in the front end. This is the third video in this tutorial series. In previous videos we've already set up our Django backend and our React.js front end, so please go back to those videos if you've not done that already. In this video, we're going to continue and we're going to create a custom user model for our login/authentication app. And we're going to be doing that by following 7 steps. First, we're going to discuss the different options that we have for creating a custom user model. Next, we're going to be creating our new user model and also set that as the model in our settings.py file. We're going to make migrations to our database and also add a new user manager. And we're going to be adding the new user model to our admin.py file and creating some users and checking them out in the admin portal. So let's get started. And the first thing that we're going to do is check out how we can actually customize the user model of our Django applications. Well, in the Django documentation, you can see that there are 2 ways to do it. You can either extend the default user model or substitute a completely customized model. Now, if we talk about extending the user model, it states that you can use a one-to-one field to a model with fields with additional information. So that would mean that we would just leave the user model from Django as it is, but we're going to create another model with a one-to-one field referencing that user model, which means that we simply have 2 models, but they are connected through the one-to-one field. So that is one of the options that we can take. However, I don't really like that particular option, and it also makes it a little bit harder when we submit data from our front end to our backend. The next option that we have is substituting a custom user model. And within that option of substituting the custom user model, there are actually 2 options we can take. Now, the first one is actually extending the user model that Django has already created. And in that case, you use abstract user. And by using abstract user, you by default take all of the fields that Django uses in the current user model, but you can modify or extend that template with fields that you want to add. So for example, you take the first name and the last name that Django has by default, but perhaps you also want to have some other fields such as a description or a birthday or those kind of things. You can add those to your user model. Now, what you can also do is create your complete user model from scratch. And if you want to do that, you can use abstract base user. And abstract base user allows you to create your completely new user model from the start. And this gives you a lot of flexibility. Now, it depends a little bit on your use case what you are going to pick. But in my case, I'm going to go for the abstract user. And the reason for that is that I actually want to use a number of fields that Django would already create from scratch. And I just want to create a few additional fields, but nothing really that special. So in that case, it makes sense to just use the abstract user model and extend it. So let's go to our Django code and actually do that. So the next step is creating our custom user model. And we're going to do that inside of the users folder and then in the models.py file. And we're going to start with an import on the top. And that is going to be from django.contrib.auth.models. And we're going to import abstract user. Because as we've seen before, the abstract base user is used when we want to create a completely new model, and the abstract user is used when we want to extend the current Django model. So now we can create our custom user model. And I'm going to do class, and I'm going to call it custom user. And in there, I define abstract user. Now, below this, we can specify the fields that we want to add or that we want to change, opposed to the regular Django model. Now, the first field that I'm going to slightly change is the field called email. And the reason that we're going to change it is that by default, the email field does not need to be unique. But in our particular use case, I want to use email as the username field. To realize that, I of course want all of the email addresses to be unique because I don't want to have 2 people with the same email address trying to log in. That doesn't make any sense. So in the email field, we're going to do models.email field. And in there, I specify a max length of 200. And we're going to set unique is equal to true, because all of the emails that we're going to gather or that our user is going to supply need to be unique. The next things that I'm going to add are some fields that we might want to extend the model with. So for example, what I could do is I want to get a birthday of my users. So I could do models.date field right here, and then I'm going to specify that null is true and that blank is true. Because these kind of fields, yeah, they don't need to be filled, but it's nice if users want to populate their birthday. You can extend this model with as many fields as you would like. So let's say that you want to build up a profile of your users and you perhaps want to ask them some questions. This is the place to add some additional fields in your application. Now, what I just mentioned is that we want to add the email field actually as the username field. And we can do that very simple by stating username field and then specifying that that is equal to email, like this. And in addition to that, you can also specify your required fields. Now in this list, so in between these square brackets, you need to put in all of the fields that need to be required when creating a user, but you don't want to include the username field or the password fields in there, because those are going to be required by default. So let's say when I'm creating users and I want people to really put in their birthday or their first name and their last name, I can add them to this required field list, and then the user is only created once those fields are provided. But in this case, for me, that is completely fine. And just like this, we have created our custom user model. The next thing that we need to do now is tell Django that we want to use this user model instead of the user model that is defined by Django. So to do that, we can go to the auth folder where my settings.py file is located. And in there, I'm going to specify a new variable, and let's just put it underneath the course allowed origins. And that is called auth user model. And I'm going to set this variable to users.custom user. And the reason for that is that we, of course, want to use our custom user model, and that custom user model is located in the users folder. So now we need to apply these migrations to our database because we, of course, have created a new custom model. So to do that, I'm going to first cd into the backend of our terminal, and I'm going to do venv/scripts/activate. Now I'm going to do Python manage.py make migrations and Python manage.py migrate, but I have a feeling that it is not going to work because we have already migrated the database before and already created a database with a user model. So I think that we're going to see an error, but let's give it a try. Python manage.py make migrations, and it of course creates a new file for our custom user, and then Python manage.py migrate. And I don't think that this will work. No, indeed, you can see that the migration admin.001 is applied before the dependency initial. And the reason for that is that we've already done an initial migration, and these two are linked together. So what we need to do is we need to delete the database. So I'm going to delete the file db.sqlite3. And for us, there's nothing relevant in there yet. So for me, it really doesn't matter. And I'm also going to delete the initial.py file and the PyCache folder that is inside of our migrations folder of the users folder. So you can see in our migrations file that we only have the init.py file ready. And now I can do again Python manage.py make migrations and then Python manage.py migrate. And now it should work the way that we expect. Yes, there we go. And you can also see that it has now created a new database for us in our project. And I'm using DB browser for SQLite, which is kind of an environment where you can see the contents of your SQLite database. And if I go to browse data and then go to our users custom user model, you can see that we have all of the fields that you would usually see in your user model. But now it has been extended with a field called birthday. So this is exactly how it's supposed to work. Now you would think that we would be done because we have defined our user model and we've clearly told Django that we want to use our email and that we want to use our birthday as an additional field. However, the thing is we are going to change a little bit the way that users are going to be created, because I only want to have the email field and the password field to be relevant for a user to log in or to sign up. However, if we create a user right now inside of our backend, so I would do Python manage.py create super user, it is going to ask me the same questions as before. So it's going to ask me for an email. It can be email@email.com, password, which can be just testing321, and my password again, testing321. But then we get an error that states that we're missing one required positional argument, which is username, because the default script that creates users and super users always takes into account the username field, because that is required to log in usually. So what we need to do is we need to create a new user manager that is going to create users and super users based on only the email and the password fields. And we're going to do that inside of our models.py file. We're going to start with another import, and we're going to do from Django.contrib.auth.base user. And we're going to import base user manager because that allows us to create a user manager for our custom user model. Next, we're going to define a class. So we're going to say that the class of custom user manager, and in there we are going to use the base user manager. And inside of that, we're going to define two functions. And the first one is going to be create user, which is just going to create basic users. And the other one is a function for create super user. And that is going to be quite similar to the user one, but with some additional information. So those are the two that we need to populate. On top of the create user function, we need to import some parameters. That's going to be self, email, password equals none, and then we do asterisk asterisk extra fields. And we're going to start off by evaluating whether an email address has been specified. And we state if not email, then we want to raise a value error. And that error is going to tell us that email is a required field. So that will let the users know that if you don't specify the email address, you are not able to create a user. Next, if we have evaluated the email is there, we actually need to gather the email. And we do that by doing email is equal to self.normalize email. And in there we specify email. And this gathers the email address and normalizes that one. After the email, we're going to define user, and that's going to be equal to self.model. And in there we specify that email is going to be equal to email, and then we just say extra fields. So here we just set the email inside of our user model. Then we also need to set the password. So we do user.set password. And in there we state that that's going to be equal to password, because that's also going to be provided. Then after we have the email and the password, we do user.save. And there we state using, and using is equal to self._db. And then as the last one, we can return the user. And that is all that we need to do to create our user. Now we're going to do something similar for creating the super user, but we're going to set some additional fields. The first one that we're going to do is the isStaff, and we're going to set that to true. So we do extra underscore fields dot set default, and we're going to set isStaff to true. And of course, before that to work, we also need to specify self email password is none and asterisk asterisk extra fields, which actually gets these extra fields such as isStaff. And now you can see that it is all correct. Now we're going to also set another extra field in there because we also want to change the value of is super user to true. Because of course we are creating a super user. And these are the two things that are going to be the change between a regular user and a super user in our case. Now the rest is quite straightforward because we actually want to do exactly the same thing as in the create user statement. So to do that we do return self dot create user, and we're just going to pass in the parameters of email, password, and then extra fields. And what this will do, it is going to actually use this create user function and fill it with exactly the same parameters as before, with the only difference that we have set some additional fields because this is a super user instead of a regular user. And now when we use this, it should all be fine. Now there are a few things that we now need to change to our custom user model right here. The first thing is that inside of our database, it could be that the username is still a field that needs to be unique and perhaps also required. So I'm going to change that and state that the username field is going to be modified in my model. And we're going to do models.character field. And in there, I'm just stating that the max length is going to be equal to 200. And null can be true because I don't really need that field. And blank can also be equal to true. Okay. Now the last thing that we need to change is when we create a new user, we need to tell it to use this custom user manager and not the scripts that Django has by default. And it's very simple to change that. We just need to go down here and state that objects is going to be equal to custom user manager. And just like this, we should be able to now create users in our terminal. But the first thing that we of course need to do is do the migrations again because we've changed this username field and also the custom user manager. So in here we specify python manage.py make migrations, which is going to create that migration file that we need to apply. As you can see it right here. And now we can do python manage.py migrate. And our migrations have now been successfully applied. So we've now created the custom user model and also the user manager. The next step is making some changes to our admin.py file. Because right now we can of course programmatically add users, but I also like to see that information inside of our admin portal, which gives it a little bit more of a user interface. So inside of the admin.py file, on the top I'm going to say from.models import all of them. And then we're going to do admin.site.register. And in there, I'm going to register my custom user model. So when we eventually log into the admin portal, we should be able to see all of the users of our application and also view the information. The last step that we're going to take is actually test this and make sure that we can create a user and then log into the admin portal. So in our terminal, I'm going to state python manage.py create super user. And it's again going to ask us for our email first. So I'm going to do email@email.com and just a password of testing321 and testing321. And you can see that it has now successfully created our super user. So it looks to be okay. Now let's start our server by doing python manage.py run server, and then we can check out the admin portal. And our server has started successfully. And in this browser, I'm going to type in the /admin. And in here, you can now see that we need to log in with our email address instead of the username. So we can do email@email.com and then do our password of testing321. And it now enables us to log in, so that's already quite nice. And we can also see that our custom user model has been listed here under the name users. And if we click on that one right there, you can see that we have our user called email@email.com. And when we click on it even further, you can see some of the details, such as the hashed passwords, our last login, and also the fields that are included in this model that we're not using right now. such as the first name and the last name, and also our birthday field, which has been added because we've also specified that one, which is quite nice. And let's see if we can also add other users inside of our admin portal. So if we click on add, I want to specify another user. Let's just state that the password is testing321. And I'm only going to give it an email of email1@email.com because those should be the only required fields. And if I click on save, you can see that we now have our 2 users. So that's nice. And that's actually all for this video. In this video, we've successfully created a custom user model so we can use the email field as our username field, and we can add some additional fields in our model to gather some more information on our users. In the next video, we're going to do some work on our front end. We're going to create a number of pages and enable page navigation with React Router. And in the videos after that, we're going to complete the sign up process so that we can create new users from our React frontend. If you've enjoyed this video, please leave a like and subscribe because that really helps my channel. And I hope to see you in the next video. Bye bye.